My dad gave me the best gift for my 18th birthday, a trip to India, just the two of us. But my jealous stepmother and her daughter burned my passport the day before the flight. Dad is furious. High. I turned 18 a few days ago, and I was supposed to go on my very first international trip to India. This was going to be a truly special journey for many reasons. My mom passed away when I was 6, and to cope with the loss, my dad and I constantly watched Indian movies together. They were colorful, cheerful, and always lifted my spirits. That's how I became fascinated with Indian culture. My mom also loved Indian films. She had lots of Indian clothes, even though she had never been there and only knew India from the movies back when she was alive. Dad promised us that one day we would definitely travel to India together and have fun as a family. Unfortunately, Mom died from a brain aneurysm in her sleep before Dad was able to save enough money to take us from Illinois to India. My parents were only in their early 30s, and it was incredibly hard for us to deal with such a loss. Mom was only 32 when she passed, and no one expected it. My parents had been each other's first and only love, so it was also extremely hard for Dad. It was a difficult time for all of us, and the only thing that made me feel better was watching movies with him. It became our ritual. Every week we watched at least one film from Mom's collection, spending that time together so we wouldn't lose our bond. That's how Dad and I grew especially close, and ever since, we've always had a warm relationship. I'm sure Mom would be proud of us, and when we meet her again one day, she'd be happy with how things turned out, except for a few moments here and there. But overall, I believe she would be proud of how we handled her loss. India has always held a special place in both my heart and Dad's, and we both dreamed of going there to learn more about this beautiful culture. But either we didn't have enough money or the time, because Dad worked so much. At one point, I almost lost hope that it would ever happen. But then, on my 18th birthday, when Dad told me that we were finally going to make our dream come true, I was overjoyed. I was literally jumping with happiness. And the best part was that my stepmother and stepsister weren't going to join us. To clarify, they weren't coming not because I didn't want them to, but because they would have missed important things. For example, my stepsister Nadia, who is 17, had her final exams during that time, and my stepmother Susan had a major work project she had been preparing for a long time. So realistically, she wouldn't have been able to travel anyway. I have this strong feeling that Dad purposely scheduled the trip at this time so we could go alone. I don't get along well with Susan and Nadia, but if I asked Dad directly, he would never admit it, so I'll just leave that as a theory. Either way, Dad announced the trip to me at my birthday party in front of all my friends, and everyone was genuinely happy for me, except those two, of course. Their faces clearly showed how upset they were that Dad had surprised me with such a gift, an international trip for my 18th birthday. After the party ended and the guests left, I overheard Dad arguing with my stepmother. I knew she was upset about this surprise. I couldn't hear every word, but it was obvious she thought the trip should have been postponed so the whole family could go together. Honestly, I'm glad that didn't happen because it would have been a real problem for me. First of all, I don't get along with Susan and Nadia. And second, it's simply unbearable to spend time with them, especially on a vacation. We had traveled together a couple of times before, and they are definitely not the kind of people you want to go on vacation with. I had already explained why this trip was so emotionally important to me, and I didn't want it ruined by their presence, so I was thrilled they weren't coming. Dad also had good reasons not to bring them. He didn't want Susan to miss her important work project, and Nadia couldn't go anyway because of her exams and her graduation coming up in just a couple of weeks. Susan and Nadia entered my life about 5 years ago, and at first, everything was fine. They were both fairly nice, and when Dad was just dating Susan, they didn't seem to have anything against me. But then, 2 years ago, after they got married, everything suddenly changed for no reason. I know for sure I didn't do anything differently, so I have no idea why they started acting this way. After the wedding, both of them began treating me horribly, and our relationship deteriorated. Before, at least things were neutral and polite, but then Susan began treating me like trash, and Nadia copied her behavior. They talked to me rudely and intentionally tried to be as mean as possible. This all happened when Dad wasn't around. As soon as he entered the room, they would instantly turn sweet again. It was very strange, and I realized I had to talk to Dad about it. So I did. We had a family meeting to discuss the issue. At first, they denied everything, but luckily I had recorded a conversation from a couple of days earlier where they were being awful to me. So they couldn't keep lying. They finally had to admit it, but then tried to manipulate the situation. Susan and Nadia started crying and told that they felt like I hadn't accepted them as family even after the wedding, which was absolute nonsense. I really did see them as family. They were the ones treating me horribly, yet they still expected me to treat them kindly when they showed me no respect at all. Dad was very confused because Susan was the first woman he really cared about after Mom, and I understood he didn't want to just let go of that relationship. He asked all of us to try to get along. For his sake, I decided to control myself, despite how they had treated me. After that, their behavior changed again. Since they had been caught, instead of being nice in front of Dad and mean behind his back, they chose a different approach. They stopped talking to me completely. When Dad wasn't around, they acted like I didn't even exist. Honestly, I was fine with that. At least they weren't bothering me anymore, so I was glad in a way. For Dad's sake, we played the role of a happy family, and that went on for about a year. I still don't understand why they started behaving like that. I hadn't done anything to provoke it. Maybe they're just insane, and what they did recently only proves my point. The day after my 18th birthday, 3 days ago, Dad and I were having breakfast, and I pulled him aside to talk about what I had overheard the night before. I asked if it was true that Susan and Nadia were angry about not coming with us to India. He admitted that yes, they were upset. But he knew how important the trip was for me and that my relationship with them wasn't great, even though we tried to pretend otherwise for his sake. That's why he wanted this to be something special, just for the two of us. Plus, the timing coincided with the anniversary of Mom's death, which made it even more meaningful. He planned to deal with Susan and Nadia later. For now, he said, we should only focus on our trip. Like I said, after a few vacations with Susan and Nadia, I realized traveling with them was unbearable. Dad and I are explorers. We like to walk around, discover new things, soak in the culture and atmosphere. They prefer staying at the hotel doing nothing. If we stayed out even a little longer, they would call nonstop and force us to come back for dinner, even if we wanted to stay out later. For us, vacations should be about freedom, adventure, and experiencing the culture of a new place. They don't get that. India was supposed to be special, and we didn't want them to ruin it with their restrictions. And honestly, I don't think we did anything wrong. After all, Susan and Nadia had taken their own trips together over the past couple of years and didn't invite us. So they had no reason to be angry. The only difference was that their trips were always short, just 2 or 3 days somewhere nearby, while our trip to India was going to be 10 full days. Maybe that was the main reason they were bitter. But aside from that, I believe we were being completely fair. When Dad told me not to worry and promised he would deal with Susan and Nadia after we returned, I was on cloud nine. I was so excited and spent the last 2 days focused only on packing and not letting anything ruin my mood because I was going to India. Yesterday everything was packed and today we were supposed to fly out, but now I'm not sure it's possible anymore because instead of just being upset, Susan and Nadia burned my passport. Yes, you heard me right. I'm not joking. They literally burned my passport, and we found out only a few hours ago. Right now it's 2 a.m., but around 6 p.m., I was going through my documents, organizing them so I wouldn't have to search through bags later. I always kept my passport in my purse, but when I checked, it wasn't there. I searched the whole house, turning everything upside down for 45 minutes until it was clear it was nowhere to be found. That's when I really started to panic. And then Susan and Nadia came into my room with these fake sweet voices and asked if I had lost something. I immediately felt suspicious, but I couldn't refuse their help. I told them I had lost my passport and couldn't find it, even though I had searched everywhere. I asked if they had seen it. Susan tossed a half-burned, completely ruined passport onto my bed and said, "Were you looking for this?" I was shocked, completely frozen. Most of the passport was destroyed, and there was no way it could be used at border control. Basically, I no longer had a passport. They looked so satisfied when they saw my stunned face. I think I just sat there in shock for a few minutes. When it finally sank in, I decided I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I put the passport aside, silently stood up, closed the door right in their faces, locked myself inside the room, and only then